I can show you how to mask an image in Photoshop if you want. Well, so what you can do, there's a system where you can actually use the paintbrush to decide what part of the painting you want and what part you don't want. So rather than using the lasso, what you do is you actually kind of like zoom in and actually get really close to the pixels that you want to keep in versus what you want to remove, and you can kind of use different hardnesses of paintbrushes and actually kind of paint the scene out almost. It's not that hard, you just need to know which tools to use and how to set it into the mode that actually applies the mask to it, which is, I have this white and black, take it over an image, remove the part that's white, keep the part that's black. So as I change this other image that's white and black, or grayscale as well, because you could actually do an alpha version where it only takes out a certain percentage of that pixel's alpha, right? Like it'll actually, I can show you that after 11. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, yeah, nice. All right, testing, 1, 2, 3, audio testing. Yelena, thank you. Peter, typing. Set, all set. We're all set. We're all set. We're all set. Sorry for yelling. Sorry for yelling. We're all set. So maybe, well, we'll wait. We'll close that door when everyone's in there. And I actually feel pretty good about this morning. Back to JavaScript. I feel like a kind of a new person. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about JavaScript in the client today, right? So far, we've been working with JavaScript for a couple weeks now in the Node environment, right? So we run it in the command line. We have this this runtime. It uses I'll stop going out of, yeah, maybe I'm not going to frame, whatever. So we have this runtime. We run our apps in there, and it happens to be this JavaScript engine that exists inside of Node. It's the same engine that runs in Chrome, so same JavaScript engine. But there's some differences, and so we need to talk about and learn about how we use JavaScript in its original environment. Because Node was 2010, 2011, and JavaScript's 1996. So it's been in the browser and tested and sort of approved out for much, much longer than in Node, right? So Node's a relatively recent sort of thing. So we will talk about the browser and sort of the different parts of the browser. There's this the thing called the DOM. I'm sure we read all about that on the weekend. Yeah? Good. Really important. It's like HTTP. If we understand about the DOM, then we can really work with sort of any framework, any library in the UI at that JavaScript browser level. So it's one of those kind of core learnings for web development. The DOM is really important to understand, but we'll understand it over time. And so hopefully this is another one of those times where I can just give you more information and you can ask some questions about the DOM if there's anything unclear. And then we can talk about how we can use JavaScript to actually modify the DOM, because that's how we create dynamic websites. So that's DOM plus JS, and there's an API that we can use within the browser. Lets us do interesting things. We'll talk about events. That's how we can actually receive input or interface with our users, is through the event system. When someone clicks on something, when someone types into an input field, we can listen for all of those events and then update the UI based on those events. So here's the browser. I'm not sure if on Tuesday of last week, when you talked about ES6, did you talk about how every browser has a different JavaScript interpreting engine, something that reads the JavaScript in, parses it, compiles, and then runs it. It's different for every browser. That's okay, cool. So here they are: SpiderMonkey, V8, Chakra, JavaScript Core from the different 4 major vendors. Here is the layout engine. So this is actually another part of it, where when we want to render, take our structure, that DOM structure, and apply the styles to it. This is actually the layout engine doing that. So the JavaScript engine doesn't care at all about the CSS and the HTML and the layout of a website. That's why it's actually not that hard to take it and put it into a Node environment and use it there, because it really just is about running the JavaScript. When we move towards doing layout and stuff, we also have to deal with different sort of layout engines in the browser as well. And some of these are actually based on the same. So Blink and WebKit actually started as the same thing. They were both WebKit, and then Google branched off and stayed branched forever and called it Blink instead, right? So that happens sometimes. This is the document object model that I want to talk about. This isn't it, but it represents it to me because it's this scary, foreboding kind of tree. And the reason I chose a tree is because the DOM is a tree data structure. The reason I chose a scary one is because everyone thought that the DOM was, that's why they considered JavaScript to be a bad language as far as I'm concerned. When JavaScript comes out, originally, it had all these things that weren't great about it, but it could still perform a lot of, I mean, you can write scripts, you can do whatever you kind of want with it, but you have to interact with this DOM, and the DOM API was really hard to work with. And so you kind of put those two things together and say, oh, JavaScript is not a good language, or JavaScript is not fun to work with. And so you get this reputation. Well, JavaScript is improved with ES6. It's way better than it ever was. This language is improving. And the document object model hasn't changed really, except for in its structure, but the way that we can interact with it, that does change. So the API that the browsers provide to us to modify and change this document object model, those have gotten better as well. So no longer scary to do this. There's easier ways that we can manage. And jQuery, the thing we're going to use this afternoon, that came because of this. That's why jQuery is as popular as it is. It's because no one wanted to deal with the low-level API from the browser, so jQuery put one on top that developers would like. And then browsers come and say, oh, you like this API? Well, we'll start to add stuff like that to the browser too, so you use built-in instead, right? And this is that evolution of the web that we were talking about yesterday. So this is, I guess, a DOM structure described as HTML. Do we see the hierarchy? There's a root node, HTML. How many children does HTML have? 2 children, yep, the head and the body. The body has another child called an unordered list. And then that unordered list has 4 of its own children. And so when it's rendered, it doesn't really look like that, but it still maintains that hierarchy. We're containing these elements within parent. There's a parent-child relationship here, all the way from the root node down. And then this is what it looks like when we actually
try and describe the DOM, right? So this is all of those nodes are broken up into a structure like this, and every one of these nodes has a whole bunch of different properties on it. Think of it as just kind of to think about it based on what you know would be, imagine if everything, each of these nodes was actually just a JavaScript object with a type, and the type was HTML or body or head or title or UL, just to sort of differentiate between what that node represents. And then inside that object, there's also a ton of properties, things like maybe the ID of the thing, the classes that are on it, any click event handlers or events that are put on that thing, they're all put into that object as well. So each of these nodes in this tree are representing an element in our website, and all of the information needed to render those things. And so through that DOM API, we can change what properties they are that exist in the DOM, and when we do that, the browser re-renders this data into our visual representation like this, and that's how we actually get the website out. So we need to kind of learn how to interact with this DOM to be able to change our website dynamic. Yes? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so I'll repeat the question. Repeat the question for Calgary before I forget. So when we have HTML, and inside that HTML, we might put some text. I put item 1, 2, and 3 here, so there's some text there within that. I'm going to show you later that when I want to create one of those things, I actually call an API called create text node, and I give it the text that I want to put in that node, and then I can make that a child of the list item, or I can take that list item and I can set its inner text property or something like that to the text I want to be in there, and it will create its own child. But that should be represented, I think, as its own node in the tree. But it's different than an HTML element because it doesn't need all those properties, right? You can't configure it like that. I think so. I mean, text is going to be a leaf node at the end anyways, right? So here it's a leaf node for all those LIs. The title is kind of the same, except we don't render the title, so I don't think that would become a text node right up here in the title. This isn't even rendered, so that might be handled differently, but at least these 4 here, this would be a child of the LI, and it would, I think, and that would be a leaf node, because you couldn't really give a text node a child. Yeah, right, of course. It would still be a leaf node. You might have another child that's a DOM element, some HTML element beside it, and they might have more children. But that text node, that's kind of where it ends, I think, yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, good, yeah. Okay, so anything else before we move on from just this tree structure that we're working with today? Okay, cool. So then we've got this tree structure, and we need to be able to remove things, add things, and change things. So the first thing we want to do, though, is figure out how we can actually get access to that structure through the browser, right? So in JavaScript, how do we access this data structure that's our DOM tree? We can do that through the document. But before we figure out what the document is, let's talk about what the navigator and the window are. So here's my browser with my location bar and my website rendered. We'll start with the navigator. If you were to try and guess in terms of the browser what the navigator is meant to represent, what would we think that might be? We've got 3 things up here, the navigator, the window, and the document, and they get more specific as I go from left to right. Navigator. Huh. So the navigator, this represents just the browser. But they didn't call it browser. When I try and access this through JavaScript, I say navigator.getPosition or something like that, or navigator.getBatteryStatus or something like that. I can access the navigator object from JavaScript when I'm running in the browser, and the navigator represents this object of things that are common to that running instance of the browser. Why would they call it navigator? Because I remember when this came out. I remember when this browser came out. It was it's Netscape. So Netscape called their browser Navigator. So it was Netscape Navigator. And when you're one of the first companies to create a browser, and then you create JavaScript, then you get to start to add DOM API. You get to call those things whatever you want. And so at that time, they called it Navigator, and now everyone else had to call it Navigator after that as well, so the web would continue to work. So this Navigator represents the entire browser, and if I jump into this, I'm actually going to load up our site we're going to be working on today. Well, that's the jQuery one. We'll do that this afternoon instead. This one here. So I'm going to be working completely in the console here in the browser today. It's actually not a bad environment. They do a lot of good auto-completing and stuff like that. I like it. It's good to test stuff out in here. It really is. Run some JavaScript. How does that JavaScript work? Well, I don't know. Load up the browser. You're already surfing Reddit or something like that. Just bring up the inspector, go into the console, run your command. You'll see exactly what happens, right? So this thing kind of travels with you. So I can do things like Navigator in here, and it prints out. Oh, okay, that's going to be, let's see. Yeah, that's okay. I can zoom in too, right? So here's Navigator. When I type in this word, it accesses this global object called Navigator, and the global object called Navigator has a whole bunch of different properties available inside of here. Try and get that a bit bigger. So at the very top, we see app codename Mozilla, still left over from those Netscape days. That's in there. I don't think it'll be removed, and no one probably uses it anymore, or at least not in the last decade, probably. So, and you got this as well, app name. These are just relics from the past, right? Artifacts. App version. So what's that say? It's saying that this is version 5.0, Macintosh Intel, so you can actually get the type of computer and what kind of processor, how new it is. I can get that information from here. Apple WebKit, that's kind of interesting. Oh, Chrome, Safari, which one are you? I mean, it's like a user agent. It just misrepresents itself, so I'm not going to really be paying too much attention to that. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, and some of it, this might be the new way we figure out which browser vendor we're actually, which vendor it is. But don't rely on stuff like this, because as you can see, it's not very reliable. It's hard to predict. What is kind of cool though, is by accessing the Navigator, we gain access to a whole bunch of API that might actually be useful and interesting to you. So MDN Navigator is what I'll search for that. I'll go to the Web APIs section, and we'll see that this Navigator here has a whole bunch of different, let's see, Navigator, and there's geolocation. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can get from the Navigator. We can actually find out, returns a battery manager object you can use to get information about the battery charging status. I mean, that makes sense for the Navigator, because I have one battery in here with one charging status. So that means that my browser has access to one battery manager with one charging status, and the same is true for location, right? So it's things that are specific maybe to the as close to the operating system as we get in the browser, and that means we've got one instance of this browser. It's called the Navigator, and we can access information like the geolocation. So let's go through that quickly, see what that looks like. This says it's read only. Yeah, I can't set my location and then transport. So it's just going to be reading stuff. I like this down here, using geolocation. Sometimes you really got to search the documentation for the thing that's going to help me out. This up here doesn't give me a lot of information. But then when I go into using geolocation, I get to see, the first thing I might want to do is check to see if geolocation is in Navigator. Why might I do that? Okay, yeah. So the browser might not keep track of geolocation, or the device, it might not. It might not be included in the browser that's being used. So this is a way that we can test to see if a feature is available to us in the browser that our code is being run on. Right? That's the difference between Node and the browser. The major difference between Node and the browser is that we control the environment that our code is run on when we're using Node, but we don't really control the environment that our code is being run in when we send it out to multiple people's browsers. So a lot of times we want to check first, does this work? Because if I try and access geolocation .get current position, it might say that method is undefined and throw an exception. Right? So I want to make sure that this feature is supported before I use it. Obviously, I'm in control of my environment that I'm developing on and that I'm showing you today. But just keep that in mind for some of these features, especially the newer ones. This one might not be a problem anymore. We can kind of look down here and see geolocation is supported in Internet Explorer 9. So yeah, we're probably fine with this one. But there's others as they add new things. You want to be thinking about how might I need to check to see if this new feature is supported, and what do I do in the case that a browser is being used that doesn't support this feature. Okay. So here is the documentation I'm going to use. It says that I can call a function called getCurrentPosition, and then I can pass a callback function, and the callback function receives a position, and then I can just do something with the data that exists there. So why do I have to pass getCurrentPosition, this function? We can try it out. I mean, we can kind of see, and it might become a bit more obvious as we start to work with it. So I'm going to go in here, and instead of do something, I'm just going to console.log the position coordinates latitude and longitude here. Or maybe I'll just console log this object. Actually, has anyone seen console.dir? That one's kind of useful because it actually makes a really nice object printout for you, especially if an object has a toString and you try and write it, it'll actually take that toString and just give you the string in the browser. But if you want it to actually give you the representation of the object, you can force it to do that with console.dir. I can show you kind of an example of that a little bit later. So I'm going to run this now. Yeah, that's why it has to be asynchronous, right? I can still interact with this page right now. Or that's why I have to call a callback, is that if we didn't, we'd be waiting for the user to interact to allow the location to be used. We'd be waiting for that until we'd gain interactivity back on this site. That would be a really bad experience. So in that case, the fact that this is asynchronous is really important, that when it actually retrieves the position, that's the time it'll actually call this function for me. So I can continue to add stuff to the to-do list. Once I finally allow my position, we're seeing it's taking some time still because it has to actually, oh, there, it got something. Let's bring that up. Oops. Let's bring that up. It got something. A position object with coordinates that have a latitude and longitude. Okay. So this is the Navigator API, and it's used to interact with sort of the root level browser API that we might be interested in. So that brings us to the second part, which is the window. What do we think is now the window? If I say window dot, because I did navigator dot, what's window dot? What does that represent? Hot, hot, hot. Current viewing window. So, yeah, I think so. I mean, this is a window. This is a window. This is a window. Now, they call them windows because it used to be that you had to run browsers like this, right? You used to have to switch between them. You can't really do that. You had to switch between them like this. So each browser would have opened up a new window, and then tabs got created, and we stopped thinking about things in terms of window because no one really does that anymore. Everyone just has 100 tabs open. Can you imagine having all those tabs open as windows? And even before, when Windows 95 or 96 or 98 or whatever didn't group your application windows, so you'd have all those it'd be like you had tabs on your start menu, right? So eventually someone looked at it and said, well, we should just move those into the browser, right? Okay, so we did that. We moved those in the browser. Every window. So if I go in here and I type window, this is the window that is here, and I say window.location, and it says that it is the client index.html file, the client.html file. Okay, so that's good. Bring up the inspector over here. Window.location. This is now developer.mozilla. So these two are different window objects. I can't access the window object over there from here. And each one has its own location. Yeah, that makes sense because this location bar really belongs to the tab. When I move that, that comes along with it, right? All the windows have their own locations. So that's why the location is not a property of the navigator, because I can have more than one of them, right? So we'll put that on the window. Window also happens to be your global object. So when I write a function, my func, I hate that name, and I call a var my var, which I hate as well, but this example is the one that I don't really like, so that's okay. So I've just done that. What's going to happen when what's going to happen when I run? I wish I could really just get rid of that thing because it's just in my way. Maybe like, yes. Oh, I learn something new every day. Maybe I knew that. Anyways, what if I run my func? What's going to happen? I mean, something's going to happen. We're not going to see any result of it, but what's going to happen? It's going to create a variable called myvar and assign 1 to it, right? Does anyone disagree with that? It's going to create a variable called myvar and assign 1 to it. Which scope is it going to create that variable in? In my func scope, it will not, because I did not put a var in front of it. Okay, so when I run my func, so first off, let's do window.myvar undefined. I run my func, and now I type window.myvar, and now it has the value of 1. So this is what happens when we don't declare our variables with the word var in front of it, or let or const, is that it actually raises it to the global scope. And in the browser, the global scope is the window object. So this is why we say don't do that. I mean, you do not want to pollute your global scope. Let's say that you use in two functions the same name, I for something. Well, those two functions, they're actually, those two functions are using the same I variable at the global scope. If you put var let const in front of it, brings it into local scope, and you can use whatever name you want as long as it is unique within that scope. So just be careful of that. And just notice that, again, window in the browser, that's that global object, whereas in Node it would have been, I think, global dot. I don't really use it. I don't, putting stuff in the global scope is not really necessary anymore with the way we do modules and stuff like that. But it still exists, and we do need to understand that window dot is the global object. Okay. So what else do I want to cover on this? Let me just make sure. Yes, okay, that's what I wanted to do with the window. So when I type window, I get a nice printout of all of the different things that exist on the window object. I'll do this. Oh, window has a document. Did you know that anything that's on the window, I don't need to put window dot in front of it? Or actually, maybe not anything. Let's try that out. Yeah, no, anything there. No, this will give me the window in this context. But that's not really related to scope. So we want to make sure, yeah, we're not. So yeah, this will give me the window in that context, whereas if I'm in a function, it would give me, however that function was called, it would change the context, yeah. So I can access things like document. That's the third thing we're going to be talking about. I can access that just directly. So things that are on the window, I can actually be explicit about and say, I want window.document, or I can just use document. Either are going to be fine for our purposes today. Okay, so what do we have on this object? Let's say there's things like, I think, inner height. Yeah, inner height and inner width. So those properties, if we wanted to figure out how big this window was, It's now, I think, 1284 wide. And so if I run this again, and I'll just do inner width here, or 1426, really? I thought it was going to be this one here. Oh, that worked. But it's probably still... Something's off there. So this number that I'm looking at this up here. And I'm trying to figure out why it says 832 there. And 924 there. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to look into that, because I'm pretty sure that before I was matching those. Whew. Well, that's weird, because all I did was zoom in and out, and I get different numbers. I don't want to use this. That's weird. Look at this. So that one's 925. I zoom in. 927. And I don't think I changed that other thing at all. I don't know what this is doing. Okay, but I can take these things and I can console log them. I can use them, window.inner height and window.inner width. And this is kind of how we figure out things that are going on. We can also find out what the outer width would be. It used to be people would use these API or that information to do those like crazy pop-up things where you click on a link by accident, or someone gets you to click on a link, and then it opens a whole bunch of windows, and then it makes all those windows like 200 by 200, and then cascades them on your screen and just keeps opening them like it's that, maybe I'm dating myself here too, it's that when you win in solitaire, it kind of, all the cards fly at you. This kind of how people would do that is through this API. They do, I think, window.open. You can just open up a new window that way. And open up a tab. Right. Oh, tab.open doesn't work. So anyways, here's the API for window. We're going to want to become slightly familiar with that. But most of the stuff you're going to want to look up. Right? And actually do what I did. Type in window and then drop that thing down and just kind of read through some of those properties. Take a look at what the values are and see what's available to you. There's also the documentation, but I prefer that investigation myself. I prefer going and looking at the object. And then if I have questions about maybe some of the details of something that I see on that object, I go read about that in the documentation rather than trying to learn about everything that's available through the documentation. Usually that's it's a preference, I guess. So here's the document as well. The third thing we're going to yeah, thank you, Greg. Area within the browser would have been the inner width if I didn't have that weird bug. Okay, cool, good. So the document, this is the third thing we want to talk about now, and this is actually everything kind of in between the bottom of the browser and that location bar. That's the stuff that's being rendered. That's your HTML and your DOM. So the document has, again, on itself, a whole bunch of different functions we can call. I can say document.get element by ID. I didn't give it an ID, so it's going to give me an error, but this is how I can actually access this. It's by calling document dot and then the API that I'm interested in using. And these are the 6 API we're going to want to learn in order to select nodes from our DOM, to be able to find the node within that tree. We're going to be able to do it based on certain criteria, attributes we give to those DOM nodes. For example, if we give a DOM node an ID, then we can say get element by ID and find that node right in the DOM quite easily. And there's a slight difference between this first API here, it says get element by ID, and the second API, which says get elements by class name. And that would allow me to search for elements that had a certain class name. So that's the CSS class that we applied to it. So there's actually this kind of tie-in between selecting DOM nodes and sometimes using the CSS rules that are applied to them to do that. So what do we think the difference is between get element by ID and get elements by class name? So this is all about good API naming, right? And one of the, I think, first rules of API naming is to use the right pluralization on your words, right? If you're going to get back a list of something, maybe you have it's pluralized. You're going to assign it to a pluralized variable. Whereas if you get one thing back from a function, maybe you assign it to a singular version of that variable name. Does that kind of make sense? So in this case, we have element and elements. So if one function returns just a single element, then we can call the function getElementById. And if we're using ID, we have a guarantee that it'll just be the one element in the whole document with that ID, right? So getElementById is a very specific way to find something within the document. getElementsByClassName is going to return all of the elements that it finds with that class name. And if there are none, you'll end up with an empty list. And if there's one thing that it finds with that class name, you're going to end up with a list that has one element in it. So this is true for getElementsByName as well. Name is going to be an attribute on a form or any type of an input element. You can actually give it a name like email or password. So you can get all the elements by a name that have the name email or password. That might be useful, but it's still going to give you back a list of all the ones that it finds. getElementsByTagName. What do we think tag name represents? Yeah, B, P, H2, yeah, exactly. So the tag name, I can get all of the paragraph tags in the document by calling getElementsByTagName and passing it the string P. Okay. So those are going to allow me to choose a specific way to get a DOM node. So I can either do it by ID, or by class name, or by name, or by tag name. I've got two more API that I could use. One of them is called Query Selector. And this is actually going to follow more in line with how jQuery works. So jQuery allows you to actually pass in something that looks a lot more like I guess, complex or specific CSS selector. I could do something more like this, where I say document.query selector, the button with the name add. So this is actually two things that I'm searching for: a button, that's actually a tag name, and I'm looking for a name, but I can combine these two things using a string like this that has this kind of encoded representation. And when I do this, it's able to find that single button on the page that has the name add. Okay. If I do document.query selector div, it grabs the div that's on the page for me. The div contains a form. So there's two different styles. If I have an ID on something, and again, like I said yesterday, the only time I put an ID on something is when I'm mounting my React app into the DOM. So it does a document.query selector, find the root element, gives me one item back, and I mount React into that. So I would do document.getElementById. Oh, it doesn't find that. I guess I should add something. Let me do that first. Okay, so I'm going to give one of these things an ID. The header is going to need an ID called brand. And so now when I say document.getElementById brand, it's able to find that one element. Okay. Now, I have, I'll add some of these things. So now my DOM structure looks a little bit more like this. Here's my div, and that div has a UL, and in that UL there's 3 LIs. So now I want to document.getElementsByTagName, and I'm going to say LI here. So this is going to select for me all of the elements in the document that has the tag LI, and how many are there? 3? Thank you, yes, great. So 3 there, and what I got back is this thing called an HTML collection. So that's the thing that groups up what's going to be returned. And if I only found one of them, it would still be an HTML collection with a length 1. Now, an HTML collection, I'll just assign it to a variable so I can play around with it. This collection, does it have a for each function? It does not have a for each function. But it looks like an array. But it doesn't have a for each function. So we got to be careful of this. Even though this looks like an array, it doesn't actually have a function called for each on it, or map, or filter, or any of the other things that an array allows you to do. We don't get to do that with an HTML collection. But I believe that we can for, let's say, element of. So I could actually iterate over this collection using for of, because it's an iterable object. It's not an array, but it's like one. So let elements, or element of collection, and then I can console.log the element, and I get A, B, C it. So it's actually, I'm able to iterate through that way. Okay. Another way I could do this is I could say, well, actually what I want is an array of these things. So I could say array.from collection. And now array.forEach. Oh, weird. What's going on there? Oh, undefined is not a function. It's what I'm passing into it. So basically, I was able to convert this from an HTML collection into an array that does have all of those methods on it using the array from method, which will allow me to convert any iterable object into an array. Okay, just a quick tip if you're interested. But the main thing here is that we get this collection of LIs and that it is not a single element. And so if I tried to do collection dot, I don't know, what's a good thing for that? I guess inner HTML or something. This is not going to be a property I can call, whereas that is an element that does exist if I actually index into that instead. So people run into this bug, and that's why I'm spending so much time on, or not this bug, but they run into this issue where they find the thing and then they try and do something with it, but they're trying to do it on a collection, not the individual element. So that's what I've just avoided here by indexing to the element specifically. Again, not a problem if you use get element by ID, but then we're having to give IDs to things, and we want to do that really sparingly. So I would say that document.querySelector is a bit of the best of both worlds. I can be quite specific about the thing that I want to find, and it's only going to ever return an element to me, not a list of things. So if I am very sure that it is just one thing, then I could be looking for the thing that has all of these, right? And it actually just finds the first one, because querySelector will never return multiple. So you better be specific enough to find the exact thing you're looking for, if you're going to use document or querySelector. And if I say document.querySelector all, then I get a list back. I get another list. But this isn't a HTML collection. It's called a node list. So that's even more confusing, right? Don't worry too much about those details. This one actually has a for each. You can do the same thing with node list. You can convert it to an array and then just do all array stuff like that. Array.from, put your node list in there, no problem. We can see that it's an iterable object because it has an iterator symbol on it. So what I'm trying to call out here really is that we got to be aware that using this API still does have some of that complexity. If we're not quite sure what's coming back, what's being returned, we might be working with it in the wrong way. So use this tool to figure out what type of an object you're actually working with. Yes? Yeah, so would I be able to use querySelector to grab only the second or the third? My CSS is not super strong, but I'm going to try... there it is. So I did, for this one, my first guess was that I could actually say, on this li, I do another pseudo selector, so a little bit of modification to it, instead where I was doing like last of type yesterday. Now I did nth of type, and I can give it a parameter of 2, so it actually finds, if it has a bunch of these adjacent to each other, it would find the second one and then give me that back. So yes, like there is a way to be specific about that. What I might do though, I think I could also give each one of these a data attribute, which is sort of a way to attach any attribute you want onto an HTML element. I could say data, so if I put data in front of it and then give it data ID, I could do it that way maybe and select through an ID instead. There's lots of ways to deal with that if you want to be specific. Does that answer? All right, cool. Okay, and we're only going to be working with this API for a very short time, and then we move to use jQuery, which makes all of this quite a bit easier anyways. jQuery is still easier than the built-in DOM API as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Questions about selecting elements before I move on? Okay, good. I know I really spent a lot of time on that one. We'll take a... let's see. We're almost there. Then we'll take a break. So adding DOM elements. This is the second thing we might want to do. The reason why we talk about selecting first is because I need to figure out where I'm going to actually insert my new DOM nodes into the tree. And so I need to be able to select different nodes from the tree. So for example, here, if I want to add a new li element dynamically, I have to first select the ul. Then I can create the li and append it to the ul. That's the operation we need to do in order to insert into the DOM. So here are the 3 API that we'd be interested in for this. The first one is the create element API, and this is how I would create a new div or a new ul or a new li element. I would do it with document.createElement. If I want to create some text, you could do it with create text node. I'll show you an alternative to that as well afterwards. And then we have the ability to also append to a node. So that's how we insert something into the DOM. If I just create an element, we will not see it on the screen. If I create a new div element, I will not see it on the screen because it exists over here in memory. But my DOM tree is over here, and the only way to get the memory, the node that I just created, the element I just created, is to append it into this DOM, and then it will render. Only things in the DOM render. Things that do not get added to the DOM do not render. So let's see what that looks like. Document.createElement li. So this is going to be my list item that I'm going to add to that the to-do list. The same thing that I do when I type in here and hit add. We're going to perform that same operation now from the console. So I guess what I should do is actually create this thing and give it a variable, because then I can reference it. So let's say this is the item. Okay. And there it is. It's an item. It's just a list item. This is kind of what I was talking about with console.dir. If I want, so here, because this item, when I try and console log it, it's an object, and there's a toString method on it. I think. Let's see. I don't know. It's somewhere. And that gets called when we try and console log it, so that it actually prints out something kind of nice like this. And this is way better to work with if I'm trying to find that thing. If I select an element, I'm trying to find it. I'll roll over this and it'll highlight it in the browser for me. That's quite nice. But if I want to see the actual properties that are on that element, then I have to do something like this, console.dir with the item, and then it will allow me to drop down and see, oh, this is just a normal HTML element that has maybe it has no children of its own. Maybe what else? It has, yeah, it's got not much assigned to it, I think. Here we go. Tag name. It's a list item tag name. There's no text associated with it. We can see there's no outer text. and there's no text content. So that's what's right here, this text content. Okay, so let's try and get some text into this node. We'll do that by creating a new variable called content and taking the return value of document.createText node, and we'll say, yeah, finish. That tab didn't autocomplete that. It looks like it wants to. There, that works. Okay, so I just created a new text node. Here's my text node, and when it toStrings, I get finish lecture on time. But if I console dir it, actually, these are the properties of a text node that I can see here. See, the data of the text node is finish lecture on time. The node value is finish lecture on time. The text content is... This is just because browsers called these things different things, and in order to make things work well for us, again, you'd add all these values and everyone would support all these things and just sync them up for you. So when I create a new text node with this one set of text, I actually get that value represented 4 times inside this node. Yes. Here, this hash? I'm not sure. That seems like it's I saw it on document 2. I saw it here on document. Someone's an HTML document. I'm not well, see, the thing is they're DOM nodes, but they're not elements. This is a text type. And if I do it for the item, the list item does not have it. I'm not sure why the text has it. No, I'm not sure why that hash is there. And I'm not. It might just be something that the browser tells us for some. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. Okay, let's keep going here. So I've got this content and I've got this list item, and now I want to combine these two things together, because if I take a look at the item, it's still alone there, and I look at the content, it has the text I want inserted in there. So what I'll do now is I will combine these two nodes together. Which is the parent and which is the child? Which one's item? Parent. Item is the parent, yep. And it will have a child that is the content. So what we're going to do is take the item and append the child content to it. Okay? So when I do this, it now makes a connection between these two nodes. There's now a connection made between these two nodes. Even though it exists over here still, 2 of them alone, the DOM tree sitting here, I can take that item. Whoa! Oh, don't lose my progress. Oh, come on. Okay, well, I'm going to have to start that over. I'll just run these commands again. So the first one was create the item. The second one was create the content. The third thing was to append the content. Now, this is what I wanted to do. Print out the... I've never run into that. And all I'm trying to do is type in item. Wow, that's unbelievable. It's so weird. Okay, let's try that one more time. If that's, I'll restart this browser if that's going to keep happening. No, it's when I try to print out the append. I've appended. It's when I try and access this variable here, it just dies completely. So what I'm going to do is close that, bring it back, and just hope that... Oops. Yeah, let's take a break. I'll finish that other stuff after. I'm gonna see what's going on here. I'm gonna try a few things, but yeah, weird. Okay. I have video of it too. This is great. I can actually tweet it or something like that. No one will believe it. Maybe it doesn't like my to-do item. It's weird. But it's like yeah, like the that sandbox browser instance crashes, right? It's not the browser, it's just that the instance in there, like the JavaScript engine or something is killing the, I don't know. It's just, and it's just when I try and it seems like it's when it tries to do that preview of what it's going to show me in the output. I'll switch this over here so that Calgary can see as well. I don't want to leave you out of it. Okay. Really? Oh, it's Stack Overflow. Okay, yeah. Should be. I just dies. I am running latest. Yeah, that's really weird. Let's see if Canary works. Stupid thing. This is like the nightly build. Yeah, if it passes all their automated tests, it'll get automatically deployed. So this one's like, but when you're developing a site, it's okay to test in this, but to use this for development is not a good idea. Because sometimes I've been working on something like there's this bug, and I keep trying to fix it in my app, and then I move over to regular Chrome, and it doesn't. It's just fine. So, yeah, definitely careful of using that for development. Yeah, for sure. I like it. Exactly, because then they get those warnings as quick as possible that something's wrong with their nightlies, right? Stuff that the automated tests won't necessarily catch. Okay, that's better. If I submit a bug report, should I just send them a link to the YouTube video? Should we all submit a bug report together? Okay, we'll do it. So I'm going to just kind of create some repro steps here. I'm going to create a new screen recording. So now, it's fine on the night one. Yeah, so actually let me just kill that and try again. Yeah, it's fine on the nightly one. So Canary is fine, so that's why I feel all right reporting this. All right, so there's my video. Right. And actually, maybe, you know what, that person might be interested in what site I was visiting, so I'm going to give them the whole view. I'm going to just kind of do the whole screen instead. I don't need to save those bytes. Ooh, we got the bandwidth to upload. So, okay, so try that again. Do great. And then we can trim this a little bit. It crashes when I try and type it. So what I'll do now is I'll actually give them that information. I'll say, here's a crash video, and so I should have, yeah, totally able to read that. Good. And if they can't reproduce this, then there's not much they can do about fixing it, right? Like, I don't know, it might just be, maybe I reset my browser. I don't care if I send this to them. This is kind of, they can't do that, but they should know, maybe. So I just add that file, and while doing a lecture teaching about the DOM API, I was in it. Sorry? Probably, yeah. Yeah, I bet it is. Because it seems like it's just when it's trying to read the thing. Although, yeah, I mean, but it's done. Yeah, I don't know. It's done over there. I don't know how they're tied together. I don't know much about them. Text node, example. Do that. Append text. And I'm going to say at the end that I tried it in Canary and it worked okay there. Right? That's probably the most important part of all of that for them, I think. Yeah. Append text to the element. Try and access element in console. Tried in Chrome Canary. Let's say, what's the date today? Tuesday. And works there. Cool. So I've included the video. I hope that works. We'll send that off. That was, I don't know, maybe see what happens. I'll try this again in a few days. Or next time I do my upgrade, I'll see. Maybe next lecture, it'll be fixed. Cool. Okay, are we good to go again, Calgary? Let me know. I won't start until you're ready. Did anyone else try it in their browser? Someone give it a shot. See if it also crashes for you. So I made an element. I can show you the three things I did. So the first thing I did was I created an element. Excuse me. And then I created content. So that's a text node. Great. Dan tried it, crashed exactly the same for him. Okay. Yes. And then the last one was to take the item and call append child on the item, the thing we're trying to append to. Yeah. And give it the. Yeah. No problem. And then the last one was just to append. Where is it? Here. And then all I would do is type in ITEM, and as soon as I got near the end of it, it would it crashed then. Oh, it doesn't. I mean, yeah. The main thing is it's assigned to a variable. No, of course not. It's the kind of thing. Yeah, you kind of have to practice because it is a slightly different environment. The good news is you got the up. I got that up arrow, so I can kind of like quickly do things again that I had done before, and then also has some level of autocomplete, right? So it's pretty. Which one do you want me to show next? Okay. What kinds of problems are you running into? Okay. Okay. And then after you have those two elements, you would append one to the other. And then we try and print it out. Now, yeah, you just type in ITEM, and when it gets, I think when it tries to get to the end, when it actually tries to print out that preview, it crashed. Okay. Are you on Windows? Or, sorry, Linux? Okay, yeah, that's probably the difference. They'd be different builds, and it's possible. So, but it looks like Dan got it. So I assumed. Are you on Mac, Dan? Are you on a Mac OS? Dan's. Okay, works now. Interesting. Let me try it again. I'll go back over. Doesn't like it. Doesn't like me. Are we ready to go in Calgary, Dan? Christian, thank you. Okay, excellent. So during the break, what I did is I went to Chrome Canary. I searched for Chrome Canary, and I went to the Chrome Canary site, or actually that's the Google Play thing. I think this one here. Ah, cool. A nightly build for developers. So this is actually a version of Chrome which every night when they commit, every day, all day they're committing changes just like we do. And when they get, every change that gets committed will be automatically tested against a whole entire suite of automated tests. If all of those automated tests pass, the build will be considered green, and it will automatically build a version for all of the platforms that they want to deploy to, specifically of this Chrome Canary. So this is always going to be the latest version of Chrome, or kind of as close as we want to get to the latest version of Chrome. And so what I wanted to do was try a different version of Chrome to see if maybe this bug had been fixed since that update that I'd done, or what's going on. So obviously something's a little bit different here. Maybe maybe I have to restart my computer. Maybe I have to reinstall this version of Chrome. I don't know. There might be some other way to fix it. But what we want to do here is be careful. Canary can be unstable. So I might use this if I want to test some new feature, or if there's a bug in the browser and I want, and as soon as I'm interacting maybe with that Chrome team, I just did maybe I did a bug submission. I'm like, oh wow, that's a bug we've never seen before. We'll keep you in the loop, and then when they fix it, let me know. I go check out the nightly build. All these things are possible. So that's what I did here. I opened this up, and now in Chrome Canary, when I use this, let's say, what are we doing? Client JS notes. So when I'm in Chrome Canary, now I can do the things that I wanted to. And the first thing I wanted to do was to create an item. The second thing I did was to create a text node that contained the content of the list item. And the third thing I did was I appended the content to the item, so now they have a parent-child relationship. And then I printed out the item, and what I get back is now this representation. And this seems to be what it was crashing on. It kept crashing when I tried to get this preview, when I tried to type ITEM. So I'm not sure what that was all about. So now I have this item thing. It's still not showing up in my DOM though, right? It's still not showing up on my page because it's not a part of my DOM. So we have steps that we can take to add it into the DOM. What do we think those are? I can append children to any node, right? Even though I did that over here in this space, any of these nodes that are over here have that same append child function. So what might I do? That would be the second step. So what's the first step? So the second step for Calgary is that you would append it to a node within the document. So I have a node in the document, I can append child to it, then it would show up. But that's step 2. What's step 1? Exactly, yeah, I got to find the node I want to append it to. And so in my case here, I've got this UL that's empty, but that's the node I'm going to actually attach these list items to. So I'll create a list variable now. Document.querySelector. I'm going to use the easy one because I'm only going to get one element back. But I know that in my document I only have one UL. So that's how I'll select it. So I'm going to grab that one unordered list. And now when I type in list, I can see, yep, there's that unordered list. I have access to it now through JavaScript. List.append child. And what am I putting in here? That's right. I'll put the item in here. So the thing so the parent is the list, the child is the list item. And there it is, right? So now we see it because it's actually a part of the DOM, and we were the ones who added it to the DOM. Does that kind of make sense? I can do this. I'd have to actually create other ones and append other ones. It can't append the same one twice into the same child. So is that okay? Cool. So that's how we add DOM elements. Here are the events. So events are triggered when interesting things happen. I didn't list all the possible events on here. That would have taken way too much space. There's lots and lots of events. I put some of the interesting ones here. The thing is, we can always go over to MDN events. And did I just open Chrome again? Yeah, I did, didn't I? Okay, whatever. My event reference, we're going to see these documents seem to change enough for me to standard events. Yeah, here we go. This is a good big list of events. These mean experimental. Just be careful. If it has that little flask beside it, it just means that it's experimental and you probably shouldn't rely on it for production code. But you can definitely experiment, try these things out, play around with them. A blur event, can play event, all these events. Look how far the list goes, right? Lots and lots of stuff. So those are a lot of different events. Here are the ones that we're probably going to be dealing with most of the time. Things like blur, click, double click, focus. What do we think blur is? Sorry? Yeah, the opposite of focus. So when I select an input element, when I click on an input element, I will get a focus event on that input element. And when I click anywhere else on the page, I'll get a blur event for that element. And then you've got mouse down and mouse enter and mouse leave. So this is actually, as my mouse goes over something, it's entering some space, some element space, or when it's leaving that space, or anytime it moves, or when it moves out of a space, or over it, it just goes on forever. When I resize the browser, I can listen for that event. When the user scrolls, I can listen for that event. So this is how we do it normally with the browser API. Create a new, we'll query the button. We'll find the element we want to attach an event to. That's the first step. Find the element we want to manipulate. And then when we find that element, we can call a function called addEventListener. It's quite a long function, but it describes well what it does. The first parameter is the name of the event. So this could be double click, click, etc. Scroll, mouse up. And then we provide the second parameter, which is a callback function. And this function will get called whenever that event gets triggered. And in that function, we get passed an event object. And that event object contains information about the event. Like where the mouse was when I clicked on the button. What were the coordinates of the mouse when I clicked on the button? Event will have that information in it. What item was actually clicked? What did I click on? Event.target will provide me that information. So this event object does change. It is always represents data about the event, but it might be different based on the contents of it. Might be different based on the actual event that triggered. Does that make sense why that would be? That not all events have the same sort of metadata that go with them. So maybe the event object sometimes has one property in it, sometimes has another one. So we have to kind of learn about these events and look at something like click, for example. The click it has a mouse event, and the mouse event, see, here's a bunch of the properties that are on a mouse event. Returns true if the Alt key was down when the mouse was pressed. Here I said the X and Y coordinates of the mouse in local DOM content coordinates. Page X and Y. Offset, there's just so much in here. And we're never going to be able to learn all these things. So the best thing to do is when you want to use an event, kind of go take a look at that event object. Put a console.dir in there or console log in there. Maybe take a look at what properties are actually on that object. For the most part, you're going to find, I think, all events have, So all events are going to be based on this base event here. And so all events will have, for example, I think a target is here. Yep. All events should have a target. And that target is a reference to where the event was originally dispatched. If I click on the button, event.target will point me back to that button that was clicked on. And this is quite useful. So you'll want to think about how to use event.target while you're working on Tweeter. Let's try this out quickly. Actually, since we're a little bit behind schedule, I'm going to skip the demo here, and we'll just do the demo when we actually add the button to the application, which will happen after pretty quickly in there. Okay, so let's load this app up and do the live demo now. Okay. So I guess I want to use this for debugging and kind of taking a look at things that are going on. So I'll keep that there. I can put in anything I want here. I can hit add button. It'll actually trigger that event. When I click on add, it triggers the click event. Calls my callback. I then go and find that unordered list in the DOM. I create my list item. I create my text node. I append them together. I append that group into the DOM, and it renders my to-do item. And I do that every single time I click on the add button. How does it get the content? Where is the content contained on the page that I want to put into my list? Like, where is that? In the form. So this is going to be interesting. Forms are going to act a little bit different than what we're used to because we're going to use the JavaScript API to kind of hijack the behavior of the form and not let the form do what it does normally, which is make a request to some server. We're going to hijack that behavior, but the information is contained within the form. It's contained within the input element of the form. And the input element is going to keep track of the state of what I've typed in there already under its value property. So when I say, if I can find that input field, then I can grab its value. That's going to be whatever was typed into that input field. Much better. Oh, okay. I click add. It grabs the data from the input field. It creates a new text node out of it. It appends it to an item, and it appends the item to my list. So let's dump all the code for this. It starts off some HTML. I import an app.js file, an app.cs file, or CSS file, and this Google font. So pretty basic body. I've got the header that contains my header up here. I don't need this ID brand anymore. That was just for that demo. So here, my form contains an input field with the name content, a button with the name add, and then I've got another div over here that contains my empty unordered list. Okay. App.js is where we're going to be doing most of the work. let's just get rid of all this and do it from scratch. All right, so now here's where I am. Finish lecture on time, whatever. I click add, and what happened? Sorry? Yeah, and it actually did a... Let's go back. It did a GET request to the URL. Well, I guess it's not a GET request because it's not from a server, but it reloaded. It made a submission to the location that I was already at. It made a form submission. It tried to call GET on the /action. So we're going to have to make sure that this button doesn't do any of that anymore. That's going to be part of our goal. Okay. So I need to start this off by grabbing that button to be able to attach an event to it. That's because everything happens when I click on that button. I'm going to look for a button, and just to get some practice, even though I don't have to do this because it's the only button in my entire document, just to get some practice, I'm going to say a button with the name equal to add. So this is going to be a little bit more specific, and it's going to find the button that has the name add rather than just any button or the first button. And then I'm going to console log, because I like to do this in very small steps, and I recommend you do the same thing. You make a small change, you test that works, and then you move on. If I try and write this whole app and then I go test it, I won't know which part's broken. So the thing I want to test right now is, what do I want to test first? Exactly, that I get the button back. Yeah, that it doesn't get me undefined or something like that. So I put button here. And now, when I refresh this page, I should see a reference to the button, but instead I see the value null. So that means that that code isn't working the way I expected because it's not finding a button with the name add. So then what I might do is bring that code into the console and try it here and say, well, what's wrong with this? Okay. Oh, let me try. Oh, that's not going to work because obviously it's loaded this code. So let's try this again. Oops. Okay. Let's try this again. So let me try the code here. Oh, that gives me the same. Oh, actually, that finds it. Okay. Oh, and don't be fooled by this here, like I almost was. This just means that this expression resulted in undefined. But button has the value of the button on the page. So that code works, right? What might be the problem? It's okay, it's kind of a hard one, but I want to think about it for a second. Why does it work here when I call this, but here in this file that gets loaded in my HTML here? Yeah. So, and yeah, exactly. The script is being loaded before the that element is actually added to the DOM. So, how this works is we start up here. We read that element. We read the HTML. We read the head. We go into the head. We read the title. We read the script. We have not read. This is the JavaScript or the layout engine reading this, right? So, it has not yet gotten to the point where there is a button created. So as far as it's concerned, there is no button to select. But all of this script here will be executed before that button gets added. Therefore, it will not find it. Okay? So we could solve this problem. Actually, it's actually kind of an elegant hack that we've done for a long time. Just move the script tag all the way to the bottom, because now it means it'll parse all this. It'll go into the body, the header, add the div, add the form, add the input, add the button, add the div, add the UL, go up. Now load the script. Script gets executed. Button is fine. We reload, and it prints out no problem, no longer null. Okay, so that's one way we can do it. Just load the script after all of the DOM nodes have been initialized. We've got better ways to do this now. Oops. We don't really. I actually think that my script belongs in the head of the document. I believe that that's where it should be. So that's where I want to put it. So these days, I'm probably going to be doing something more like this, which is a newer feature. I just added the term async to my script, and now, well, let's remove it, break it. It's null, right? Add async to this to say, don't load and run all this script before you continue. Start the process. But in the meantime, you're going to be loading all that DOM. When the script's actually loaded, then run it. Well, that timing actually seems to work out here. That the button actually exists now. So there is this kind of concept of DOM nodes being ready or loaded or not. And I'm going to show you the built-in event we can listen to that would tell us that the DOM is ready for manipulation. Because I think this is the approach we should take. Actually, maybe the async one's pretty good these days, but we still need to kind of show this API. So document, add event listener. So it's the document that I want to add the event listener to, because it's the document that knows when the DOM content is loaded, when all that DOM tree is ready to go. DOM content loaded happens to be the event name. So when the DOM content is loaded, then call my function. And now in this function, oops, let's do that way. So in this function now, I can be sure that all that DOM content is available to me, and so it will not. It'll run the script before that DOM content is loaded. It'll create the event handler before the DOM content is loaded, but it will not execute my function before the DOM content is loaded, which means that that it'll actually be there. It'll be available to print it out. Greg, thanks. You're right. Refresh the page sent the data nowhere. I think they were talking about the form thing, and I apologize for missing that. Yeah, it's no problem. I should really be. I'm going to do it this way. It's kind of what I prefer to do if I am going to get a few things. Something like this. There we go. Now I can see. Oh, I got to do one more. Now I can see the browser. Perfect. There we go. Okay. So now I'll run this, and it works again. Now the JavaScript is responsible for making sure the DOM content is loaded before actually running my code. So I made sure the first thing worked. What do I want to do with this button? Okay, yeah, when I press on it, I want to add a list item to my list. So how do I know that I've pressed on it? I'm listening for a click event. Exactly. So I'll do button.add event listener, click. So this is saying I want to take the button, I want to add an event listener to it. So whenever the button is clicked, call the function that I provide here. And again, really just going to test this out. Clicked. Simple as that. I can just say, does it work when I click this thing? Kind of. Let's try that again. What's going on there? So we're gonna pretend Greg didn't ask that or answer that question before, and he just told us again why that's happening, right? It's happening because it refreshes the page and sends the data to nowhere. When I click on that button, it's doing two things. It's calling this function here, and it's also doing its default behavior. It's also submitting the form. So that's why we see this quick flash of output. And I think if actually I don't know if I can keep this or preserve log, there we go. We can see exactly what's happening. So how do we prevent the default behavior? I'm going to show you. You don't have to have the answer to that. Event.prevent default. Okay, so because the event is passed to every single one of these, it also gives us this function. If we call this function, it tells the browser that we do not want it to execute the default behavior. Whatever the default behavior would have been for that action, we actually don't know necessarily. what that default behavior would have been. We just get to say don't do it. So for a button inside of a form, it means don't submit the form. Don't do a get method with an action /. I see what you're saying. I think so. We're getting it's no problem. I'm just trying to. I think the confusion is about how we're almost like overwriting this default action, and so you're saying that any of the default actions should get done last anyways because we need to know if we should have done them first, right? So you're saying we have to first do these custom actions to figure out if we should do the default actions or not. But let's say let's say that there is no event it's not actually a last event, but yeah, it does happen at the end. There's a browser phase where it says trigger this form action, but that's after all that JavaScript stuff had happened already. Okay. Yeah. So now, when I click on this thing, it's preventing the default action, and then it console logs clicked, and so I stay on the page. And if we see, kind of up here, yeah, like that. It doesn't change the URL. It doesn't refresh it. I don't get those URL encoded body or the query string on it, right? All right. What's the next step? Now that I have this button that I can click on. Anything's fine. I'll correct you if it's not exactly right. Sorry? Create a list item. Yeah. So we want to create our list item, so we'll work back from that. All right. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Save form input into a variable. Thank you, Greg. Yes, perfect. Right. So the form input, we're going to be actually able to grab that. The first thing we need to do before we grab the form input is select the form. So we'll say, or not the form, we'll actually grab the input element. That's probably better for this one. So document.query selector input with the name, I forget. Input with the name content. Okay. Console.log input. Okay. Yep. I'm able to see that is the thing that I was able to select. It logged it out for me, so I have access to it. We'll say console log input dot value. Now it's printing out just the text that I've submitted. Okay. So I've got the input value. I want to take that. I've stored it into a variable. Now what? Do I have everything I need to create a to-do? So I have the content. It's input.value, right? I could. So what I would say is, what I was doing this morning, or not this morning, I guess, earlier with Chrome Canary, is I was trying to do this, create the item, create the content, and then add those two things together. And so now I have what I need to do this, because it's this content that I was dependent on for that. I'm working backwards. I need to somehow get this data. Okay, well, that's stored as input.value for me. So now I can document.create text node with that information. I can say document.create text node input.value here. So now this is going to be my content text node. And I can console.log the content now. I can see that's a text node. Just kind of how it's represented. The fact that I can, I was able to hover over it. I'm not sure what's going on there. So I've got the content available to me. I think the next thing I want to do is add this to do, which is, what's the process for that? What are the steps? Create list element. Thank you, Christian. Yes, there we go. I can see that now. Okay, so item. Cool. Created the list element. I've got the content. I've got the item. These were the two first steps out of 3 that I was able to use to crash my browser. Right. First, I created the content, and then I created the item, or one of the other way around. Then what did I do? Append. So append what to what? Content item. Thank you. Yeah. Item.content. Yeah. Thank you, Kate. Yeah. So I'll append the child, or item.append child content. Exactly. So everyone's got this. So now when I console log the item, what do I expect to see in my console output if I console log this item? It's now the combination of the two, right? So the item, it starts off as a list item. I take a node, I append it. When it prints it out, it's actually going to give me the entire representation with the text in there. So I have my list item with the text inside of it. My last step, or actually I guess I got to grab that list. Yeah, thank you. So Greg says to grab the query selector, or use the query selector to grab the UL, and then take the list and append child the item. So now we get what we want. Right? Okay. There's a few things going on that I want to fix before we finish off. I also think it makes a lot of sense. All of this here represents this concept of adding a to-do. So I want to bring that into its own function. I want to say function add to-do, and to-do just takes in some content. And actually, maybe I could shorten this just a little bit by appending directly into it. I can do this chaining. I can do as much of this chaining here. I think, yeah. Maybe not. No, let's do that. Okay. So I've got the list, got the UL, and it's all in this function. So anytime I want to add a new to-do, I call add to-do, and I pass it input.value. And this is just a refactor. Oops. This is just a refactor, so it should work the same. Oh, no. Input is not defined. I missed something, so it's probably this up here. Yeah. I just forgot to switch this over to be content now instead of input value. So now when I do this, it adds the stuff. But there's a problem. What's the problem? I'd say it doesn't reset the text area is the way that, what I was thinking of. Yeah, because these are still getting created individually, but I'm just typing into a text node that has whatever it had in before. So one of the things I'd probably want to do is clear this thing out when I click on that button. Is it because we prevented the click? No, this is actually more to do with we're just not resetting the value of this input field back to empty string when we're done with the value. And this is actually more of a decision we're making, is that the user experience we want? Because if there was an error, I wouldn't want to clear that field. I'd want to show them the error and keep the text in there. But if everything's successful, well, then I should take the text out of there, use it, and then replace it with an empty string so that a user can type in another to-do if they want. So here we can say after we do the to-do, we take that input and we just assign it back to empty string. So now, oops, semicolon. There we go. So now, much better. It clears it after every iteration. Right? There's another problem. That's not very nice, is it? So we might want to also make sure that the input is not empty before adding the to-do with it. So we'll wrap this up here and say if input.value, I guess if it's a value, right? Because otherwise it's falsy because it's an empty string. So if there actually is a value, then we'll add the to-do with that value and we'll reset it. So now, when I'm clicking this button, I promise you. And it's not doing anything now because it's preventing that. But as soon as I type something in here, well, input.value is now a truthy value. It'll pass that condition. It'll add the to-do, and then it'll reset the value for you. Okay. So that is all of the content that I had for you today. Any questions, let me know. Back this afternoon, we're going to build the exact same thing using jQuery instead. And the idea is just to see that the API is different, but you can do the same stuff, and it might mean writing some less code, fewer lines of code, I guess. Cool? Hope Calgary's good. Sorry for missing a few of those early questions. I'll try and get better on that for the next time. Thanks, everyone.